This is an unbelievable election, right? I mean, it's really where you have two candidates that are just so unpopular, and I think all for good reasons, right? I mean, there's not really a shortage of reasons why people aren't happy with either candidate. But I will say that it is people are very frustrated, I think, with the Republican candidate. But what I always tell people is that look, this is somebody who never ran for public office. And I think it's okay in America that we have somebody who's never been in politics before, who can step up and run, who's been kind of a Hollywood star, and if you've never done this before and you've never been involved in there's so many issues that I'm involved in on a daily basis. I don't care how old you are, what you know. I mean, there's just no way you can know all of these issues and be able to answer them articulately, especially when you're running for the highest office in the land and be hammered by the media day after day after day. You are bound to say something that each time that's going to get you into some kind of trouble. And I think that's and the difference, I think Donald Trump, he actually enjoys doing that. So sometimes he says it just for fun. I mean, he's breaking every single rule in the Politics 101 class that you would learn at Fresno State. He's breaking every single rule, and from my perspective, hey, it's a free country. Nobody ever said you had to be a congressman or a senator or a governor to run for president. This guy's like basically breaking all the China, and it's from my perspective, it's although frustrating because clearly we'd like to have, especially from my perspective, I'd like to have somebody that's a little, more articulate on the issues, that actually knows what the agenda is that the Republican Party is putting forward, and I'd like for that agenda to be taken to the American people. However, it's just kind of went down into the gutter. Look, politics is always in the gutter. Let's just be honest. But this is much more than normal, and I think mostly because the Clinton political machine is very, very good. I mean, this machine, they've been around for a long time, and they're very, very good. And if you look at, I think the most interesting thing that's coming out of all these emails that are leaking is you're actually getting an inside look into how a sophisticated political machine operates. And it's probably now, just remember, if you're happy about the WikiLeaks, just remember that could soon be you. So it could be your company, could be yourself, and it's part of the reason why I don't put anything on email, or very, very little. I communicate. Now, of course, I've been scared to death because I'm on the Intelligence Committee, so I know what our adversaries can do. But I've said for a long time that if you are using the internet or putting things onto your personal device, don't worry about the NSA looking at it, because almost anyone if they want to, they can track you. And in fact, there are private companies who do it. That's what they do for a living. Maybe even some of you here do that for a living, or at least maybe you're even buying the data to market to those people. So with that said, this is it's going to be, and I'm sure we'll have some more questions on it. But right now it looks like that Trump is down in the polls, but at the same time, he's a very good communicator, and he's bringing a lot of people out that we don't, that normally wouldn't vote. And so, I think it's been overall good for the process. It's just as frustrating as it is. I think it's good every once in a while that we should have somebody come from nowhere and be able to run for president. Maybe may not win, but hey, it's something you can look back on, and it's an election that we're probably never going to forget. That's for sure. Just real quickly on water, we've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months putting together an assessment of the 6-county region. So from Madera to Kern County, we had a water forum where David Valadeo and I presented the findings of that study. It's actually online. I thought about giving it this morning, but it's about 30 minutes, and it's probably a little more depressing than the global security situations that we're facing. But the bottom line is that we're short about 2.5 million acre-feet of water a year, and it took us a while to get this assessment because, of course, you have different water districts, different agencies that it's very tough to get information out of. But the bottom line is this. We farm in this 6-county region about 3 million acres. We're short about 2.5 million acre feet. And so in rough numbers, once the groundwater regulations come in, about 1/3 of those acres are going to have to be idled. So that is going to be extremely damaging to this valley. So, it's happening now on the west side of the valley, which, it's a long way from population centers, so a lot of us don't see it. But you see what's happening in some of the smaller communities where you've got, basically 80–90% of the farmland is now dry in areas of the west side. Well, that's going to move over to the east side. So you're going to start seeing land traditionally that was farmed, that over the course of the next decade, if nothing's done, that land's going to come out of production. So we have that presentation on our website. But I would also encourage you, if you want, if you have an event, or you have a Rotary Club or any type of organization that you belong to, I would like to offer up my staff, or I'll do it if I can, if I'm around. But we'll come and give that presentation. I think it's worth your while if you're interested in agriculture and interested in economic growth here in the valley, because it's important for people to understand what 1/3 of the land coming out of production is going to do to this economy. And we can see it now, right? 10 years ago, people say, well, it's far off. Well, now, really by 2020, it's going to be pretty well known what land is going to be coming out of production. By 2025, that'll be implemented. So we're looking at about 2.5 million acre feet that we need. Now, we can get that water. If you just change a few federal laws and build a couple water projects, we can have that full 2.5 million acre feet, which would mean that every single acre in this valley would be farmed if we had that. So, and just to put in perspective, we've had over 10 million acre feet of water that has went out to the ocean even this year. So, people were very critical of Donald Trump when he came here and said, well, there's no drought. And actually he was right. There's really is the drought that's here is being caused by government. So it's a man-made drought. And this year was actually a decent water year. It wasn't perfect, or this last winter, but it was essentially almost normal. And when you've got over 10 million acre feet of water going out to the ocean, how can you say that you're in a drought? The infrastructure was there. The water should have been moved. These systems were built to withstand 5 years of drought. That's what the founding fathers of this infrastructure knew, how much water it would take to supply cities and supply farms, and that's why we spent all the billions of dollars to build the infrastructure all over the state. And when you shut it off, and you don't move the water, and you let the water go out to the ocean, and then you fly here, and you get off your Air Force One, you stand in the middle of a dry field, and you blame global warming. Nobody is criticizing President Obama for that. Even at that time, there was millions of acre feet going out to the ocean. But just the unfairness in this and the misrepresentation. So when Donald Trump comes here, flies over it, we point out the water projects, he knows that there's water going out to the ocean, says, hey, there's not a drought here, there's water going out to the ocean. People criticize him. It's a little bit, there's a lot of dishonesty in the media today. And that's part of what we're dealing with here, especially on this water issue. And so, my hope always, and I've given this speech over and over and over again, but we really need to unite from Madera to Kern County and speak with one voice if we're ever going to have a chance at 2.5 million acre feet coming back to this valley and all the land being farmed. So let me just switch quickly to tax reform. Despite what you may hear, Republicans actually do have a really good plan for tax reform. It's a project that I've been working on nearly for a decade now with Paul Ryan, but it basically gets rid of the income tax and it replaces it with a cash flow tax. That's something that would really revolutionize the United States. It would get us economic growth. People always say, well, what's your biggest concern around the globe? Is it ISIS? Is it what are we going to do about jihadists? Is it China? Is it Russia? And I always say, well, the biggest problem actually is $20 trillion in debt that we hold, plus $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and no economic growth or low economic growth. So we have to get back to where we're seeing above 4% economic growth, and that can happen. There is a lot of money sitting on the sidelines right now, all over this country and all over the planet. That money's got to be brought back into the United States. It's got to be taken from from underneath your mattress and put into the economy so it starts to turn by people like you that are involved in commerce. Once that starts to happen, you get job growth. So, how do we do that? We accomplish it by essentially getting rid of the income tax, moving to a cash flow tax, so that we don't have all these complicated credits and deductions and special programs. Essentially, it's a 25% rate on whatever money you have left over at the end of the year. So it's 100% expensing. So you can buy anything that you want. Everything is 100% expensed. Whatever you have over at the end of the year, you pay 25% on that. Pretty simple reform, but believe it or not, that's taken a long time to perfect. So what we do is we separate out wage and business. So any business activity is under a cash flow system. And then we simplify the wage side also. So when you do that, I believe we would have tremendous economic growth. No other country has a tax system like this. And it's one that we are actually, not only do we have actual legislation that's out there now, our plan is to introduce that legislation no matter who is president when we get back and pass it in the next year. So that's a quick run on the tax front. So I talked water taxes, and let me talk let me just talk briefly about the national security situation. To put it in a nutshell, it's really bad. And that's not to, I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I've said it publicly now for a long time, but we are facing the #1 terrorist threat we've ever faced, right, since 9/11. There are more active jihadists globally than ever before, including in the United States. We've got Russia, who is adding to the military day by day. They're back into a Cold War frame of mind, where they're putting submarines and ships back into the Atlantic. They're moving. We know what they've done in Syria. They're backing up bad regimes, just like they did during the Cold War. China has taken over, essentially militarized the South China Sea, which is where a large percentage, over half of the world's commerce travels through the South China Sea. So they have immediate kinetic capability all over the South China Sea, which at some point, that can be used as a very deadly weapon for all of us globally, especially for economic purposes. So that's kind of China. You've got both China and Russia actively ever increasing their capabilities with their cyber capabilities and cyber crimes. So if you just some of the papers that have been written, and if you've read some of the news articles, the Chinese have entire thousands and thousands of people dedicated to essentially cyber attacks and cyber espionage. And they continue to get better every single year, and we obviously have to be vigilant about this, and we have to work with our allies to try to deal with this threat. Iran and North Korea, I lump them together. They're both on the pathway. Well, you already know North Korea is already testing nuclear weapons. My guess is that Iran is going to get closer and closer to having a nuclear weapon if they're not already there, despite the agreement that is bragged about by the administration. So then, if that's not enough, you kind of take all of that and then you mix in just the future cyber digital warfare problem that at any given time, all of those problem sets that I just described can use that. Not to mention an occasional problem in Venezuela or Egypt or somewhere else. So with that rosy picture I just painted, maybe I'll just stop there and we can go into questions. We can get deeper on some of these issues if you'd like. But thank you for having me. But we'll take some questions. Yes.
States was approved for about 50,000 refugees, but we've only admitted, I think, about 25,000. Is that correct? What is the plan for our country in refugee acceptance?
So I would say that the Germans, those are the only the refugees that they know about. So it's likely more than 1 million. And I think that's Europe's biggest challenge is, they have the ones that they've processed, but they don't know about the ones they haven't processed. And in there, look, this is no surprise. Of course, jihadists are going to try to send refugees out and develop cells. And those that deny it are their head is so far in the sand. I was going to use something else with my daughters here in the audience, but
good catch.
You just can't. We've already seen them go operational in Europe, right? So, and they'll quickly say, well, it's not some of them aren't refugees. Well, they're all working together, right? So it goes from, you've got the people who were born there, maybe first or second generation. You have an influx of all these bad guys. And if you look at, I actually think that, ISIS which is an offshoot of Al Qaeda. The president has talked about how bin Laden's dead and Al Qaeda's on the run. I actually think that Al Qaeda is more dangerous than even ISIS because I think they're sitting quietly, they're waiting, they're very patient, they're playing the long game, and I think I'm waiting for an Al Qaeda style attack. If you look at the attempted bombing that you had, the guy that had 12 different bombs that he had produced in New Jersey a few weeks ago. There's still an active investigation there, but it looks like he was maybe a little bit closer to an Al Qaeda operative than he was an ISIS operative. We'll let the investigation take place, but I think Al Qaeda is being very, very methodical in what they're doing. And so what the Congress has said, which I think is this is a no-brainer policy, in my opinion, is, hey, let's put a pause on this until we can actually verify 100% that we're not going to let anyone in that's bad, that could be a problem. But you've got the President of the United States, attacks, Donald Trump, I think, has called it extreme vetting. And, look, he has not articulated it very well sometimes because, the last thing we want to do is say, well, if you're this religion or that religion, you're not going to come into the country. Nobody's interested in doing that. But at the same time, we do have a jihadist problem. We have this refugee problem. And we know that jihadists are trying to infiltrate those, through those lines. And it's got to be stopped. And the Congress overwhelmingly passed a law that said, hey, we're going to put a pause on this. But of course, in the Senate, it only got 56 votes, so it didn't get the 60 votes needed to get to the president's desk, which the president said he was going to veto it anyway. So, there's talk that some people want to let in as many as 500,000 refugees. So we're going to let in, and just think about this, we're going to let in basically the city the size of Fresno. We're going to let in people from Syria, or maybe not Syria, most of them don't even have records, right? And we're going to let them into the United States. Who thinks that's a good idea here? I don't understand that. And I think most Americans don't understand it. I just hope that, I wish that our Republican candidate would do a better job explaining it. But I was surprised, so the Dutch ambassador to the United States was here and gave it, and was critical of the refugee program?
Not critical of the program, just stating numbers.
Numbers,
yeah. The Dutch had accepted 5,000, I believe, of refugees, but that represented a higher percentage of what they're
Dealing with, and their largest threat is Russia, based on the Malaysia airliner that went down, and
Yeah.
they intend to prosecute to the fullest, and they're very patient with that. The concern was the total picture was looking at what's happening with the European Union, with the refugee crisis, and with Brexit. how is this going to affect the whole economy, and then how will that translate in global economy, and how will that affect the U.S.?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Well, I guess it's the whole issue of, okay, I guess Russia, big picture, is more dangerous because they have nuclear weapons and they could wipe, Europe off the map. But I don't think you should. I don't think you can downplay that the jihadist problem that's all over Europe. I mean, it's almost like they're becoming immune to it, right? There's an attack every 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, priests get their heads cut off in France. You get a truck that drives through, down a well-trafficked tourist destination and runs people over. I mean, this is it's hard to ignore that this threat isn't there and isn't growing. And I will just say, just for the record, that it was also 4 years ago that Mitt Romney, remember, he said that Russia was the biggest, one of the biggest problems, and Obama made fun of him. Remember that? So, just pointing that out. Yes, sir.
Congressman, my name is Bill Reese, and I'm with the Jordan College grad at Fresno State.
Oh, great. You have any students for us?
I'll go get some if you want. Thank you for your presentation today, by the way. Appreciate it. Several of my colleagues and I, over the last few years, have been looking at issues of global food security or insecurity and the relationship that that has with regional instability. And a lot of people don't realize before the uprising in Syria, there was 3.5 years of drought, and the stories are endless. I just thought maybe you could comment on your perspective on the relationship between food insecurity, which is going to increase, and how that is related to issues of instability, whether they're man-made or whether they're climate-related, because we think it's a very important issue. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so. We make the argument a lot in Washington, and anytime they're talking to people about California agriculture. And I think a lot of times we walk around with blinders on because we see all these fields and we think, we just don't, we grew up here, right? Or, if you grew up in agriculture, you don't realize that the size and scope of agriculture here in this valley is unparalleled in the entire world. I mean, this is the #1 agricultural region in the world. It's the most diverse, grows over 300 different crops, all the things but until you get out of this area and have been across, been around the rest of the United States to see agriculture or around the world, you quickly realize what we have here is such a national asset to the United States, right? I mean, one of the most important things that we can do here in the United States is we can feed ourselves. And not only can we feed ourselves, we can feed a whole bunch of others who can't grow or produce their own food. And so I'd first point out that one of the concerns I have about a lot of this land being dried up, a lot of the products that we grow here are specialty crops. And so when you look at food safety in terms of, look at how many times we've had recalls over the past few years because there was a food safety issue based on some type of bacteria or something. How do you have any control over that if we essentially farm out, no pun intended, our specialty crop growing to Mexico, Central America, South America, Asia? We have no control over that. And so just right there, you have a food safety issue. When it gets to the larger issues of water in the Middle East, so you are right that there are issues there with water use and the movement of water. I would say the bigger challenge there in the whole Middle East is that the lines were drawn there arbitrarily after World War I, and really they divided up tribes, they split people apart, and I think many times I can't put myself, I wasn't, this is 100 years ago, but they did it on purpose, right? I think they did it on purpose in order to create, I think, from the European perspective, right, or from the West perspective, to create safety, right, and to create, to basically prevent another Ottoman Empire type of development there. So that's problematic because if you take Jordan and then you go north into Syria, really the southern end of Syria is effectively people that are all the same. And so they divided, by cutting across there, to divided it. And then what did you do? By dividing it, you don't allow, because a lot of times people have developed over time, and you're a professor, you probably know this a heck of a lot better than I do, but people, civilizations develop based on geography. And so geography then, dictated that. Well, a lot of times, so if you take that particular area, what's happened? They cut a line across there, and then there's no rule of law, there's no governance in a geographical area. And so how do you build water projects? How do you move water? And so a lot of what's happened there is not it's not due to necessarily drought as much as it may be due to lack of infrastructure development as the population grew. So I think if you had infrastructure development in that region, you'd be a lot better off. But how are you going to develop infrastructure? Like, let's say, take this area, go back 100 years ago. If we would have basically split, what would have happened if we would have put 3 countries within the San Joaquin Valley? How are you going to develop any of this infrastructure, right? I mean, it was because this was a geographical area, they could build an infrastructure project that took water from a wet area and moved it to a dry area. So those types of projects, I think in the long run, have to be developed. And anyway, I try to speak specifically to that region, which I've been there several times, so I kind of, you're exactly right though. One of the big fights there is there is a major water problem. So, did I give you enough on that?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
How did the Uranium One transaction get done, and why hasn't it been brought up at the debates?
Well, I think you should ask the second question first. How come there's a lot of things not being brought up at the debate? The first 2 debates were totally useless. I mean, there was no issues were talked about. I think what's happened here with, if you look at what, and I assume you're referring to the Iran agreement.
Uranium One.
Yeah, but you're referring to and how the Russian issue with the Clintons and how that was approved by the Secretary of State. Yes. Look, why isn't Donald Trump? Look, it's very frustrating. It seems like it's a no-brainer to bring those issues up. He finally did get to the Clinton Foundation issue, which I think is legitimate. I'm not trying to politicize this event here this morning, right? But how can you, as Secretary of State, you have your husband out there with a foundation, that's your family foundation, that your daughter's working for, and you're taking money from foreign governments or foreign entities that have business before the U.S. government? I mean, think about this. I mean, look at how regulated, let's just take, politicians in Washington, for example. We are heavily regulated, right? So any individual here, you're all American citizens. You can write me up to a $2,700 check, okay? That's it. You can't give me $12 million, okay? It's impossible. So, and then, we put these, this has been debated in Washington for a long time, on, how do you regulate political contributions to politicians? And look, I think we have a pretty good system now. I get criticized when I say this, but I just, we have to raise so much money every year to run TV commercials, or, do mailings, or to support the party political system. Who's, for $2,700, that you're not going to do something for somebody because they give you $2,700, right? And so that's why those limitations were put into place. So when you look at it's not just that decision for, with the Russian company that did that. What about this whole issue with the Moroccan government? What about the issues, that just came out? What about the issues with a bunch of the Arab countries, giving a $1 million birthday present to Bill Clinton? I mean, this stuff is really, really bad. I mean, look, and I'd have no problem if Bill Clinton's a former president and Hillary Clinton was not elected as to the Senate or as Secretary of State. I have no problem with that. Look, I mean, he's gonna, if it's a foundation and he's out trying to do good things, fine. But look, you just can't honestly say that these governments were giving that level of money to the Clinton Foundation just because they like Bill Clinton, right? Because Jimmy Carter has a foundation, the Bushes have foundations. They're not getting that size of checks. So, this is why we brought in limitations, and I say we, kind of the U.S. government over time, brought in levels of what is the appropriate size contribution, right? So like when I was first elected, it was $1,000, and now it's $2,700. Well, but like I said, I can't get $12 million from you. Not that you would give me $12 million, but I just can't take it from you. So, I was glad. I thought Trump did a really good job last debate by bringing that up, or at least bringing up the foundation. I think there needs to be more questions asked. But look, and this is one of the challenges that we talked about. When you get someone who's never run for office, and they don't stay on message, it's hard to, because that would have been what I said. What I said that I thought Trump needed to do to win this election was really, and I was on KMJ and I said the same thing the other day, but is that he needs to look and act presidential so that people think he can do the job. He needs to talk about his issues on economic growth, ISIS, a lot of the what are his plans to make America great again, make America safe again, right? Articulate those, and then prosecute Hillary Clinton for all her inconsistencies over her long career. And I think if those three things, I think Trump could win. But so he's got some time to do it, but we're running out of time. I mean, it's 17 days left. So thank you.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the corruption of the FBI and the Justice Department and how that's going to get turned around, particularly if Hillary gets in there?
Well, I'm worried about, what really worries me is that, and this actually popped up in one of the, if you look at these, the FOIA request that was released last Friday, one of the things that caught my attention was you had people within the State Department talking about a shadow government. This actually has not received much press coverage, but to me that really caught me, because you have essentially the bureaucracy itself, people within the bureaucracy, saying that the political class is running a shadow government within one of the largest agencies and most important agencies in the United States, which would be the Department of State. My guess is that there are similar things being done across all the agencies of government, where it's not just, what bothers me is it's not just ones and twosies of people that maybe burrow in, what's called burrow in and stay in an agency, and you kind of know who they are because they're a known political hack. You know that they're going to be whether it be Republican or Democrat. That happens when you change over administration. But what was described and what was created was they actually took all the bureaucracy, the people that work in government, they essentially left that alone, and then they brought in all these new people to essentially what they called a shadow government. So that has got to be looked at and I think prosecuted by Donald Trump to say, look, this shouldn't happen. And so, how's that going to be fixed? I mean, ultimately, it's only a lot of these issues only get fixed by winning elections, and that's one of the things that's very frustrating as a Republican. And you see a lot of the some people wanted this candidate, some people wanted that candidate. But what I always say is, at the end of the day, politics is a team sport. The Constitution's very clear. You have to have 218 votes in the House, and I get in a lot of arguments with my colleagues because they want it their way or the highway. Well, you can't. That's not how a democratic republic works. If you are the majority party, you have to move legislation that you all agree on, and you should be delivering. One of our challenges has been where we should be delivering 245 votes for something. We deliver, barely 218. Or we can't get the votes, so we have to cut a deal with a party who's not in power, which is not who the people of the United States elected, right? People put the Republicans in charge expecting them to promote an agenda. And so, when we have Republicans who want to be independent agents, look, it's fine. I mean, in terms of look, we're all elected. I can say whatever I want on your behalf, and so should they. But at the end of the day, you have to realize how the Constitution works and how it's set up. And that's been our biggest challenge, is trying to deliver and articulate legislation, and then get the Senate to take it up, and at the same time get our presidential candidates to talk about what we're doing. And so I think people are, I think there's no secret that if you look at the divisions within the Republican Party, and look, some of this was having 17 candidates run. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this, but at the end of the day, I think I put the biggest blame goes to those that ran for president and those in the Senate and the House who don't articulate to their constituencies exactly what I just articulated, which is, look, we've got to work together. And we have to, the more we work together, the stronger we're going to be to try to stop things like a shadow government from being formed. So, that answer your question?
Yes.
I mean,
But to be more specific, what do you do with
Someone like Comey, who obviously was somehow corrupted in this process, who is a Republican that people thought very highly of?
so I actually am not, I'm not convinced of that. That I don't think that Comey, at this point, I don't have any evidence to say that he's somehow corrupted. And look, I have to work with him very, very closely as Intelligence Committee Chairman. He's very well respected amongst his peers. He's very well respected by a lot of members of Congress who worked with him. So he used to be like an assistant U.S. attorney. We have several, as you can imagine, several attorneys in Congress, and who used to work with him directly. I think maybe where he made his mistake was, he probably should have convened the grand jury. I think that was his big mistake, because I think there was enough there. And I think when you look at what he said, and this is one of the challenges with prosecuting this case, right? Is no one ever thought, okay, that one that's at a high level of power, at the secretary level, arguably the number 3 in the government, right, as essentially the running the whole foreign service, that individual would set up a private server in their home, knowing what she should know, which was what I articulated earlier, that the Chinese and the Russians and all the cyber problems that we have, she had to know that they were trying to, she would be one of the top targets in the entire government. So no one, the Congress, I think when we put in these original laws, first of all, when these laws were put in terms of record keeping, we didn't really have computers then. And so we sure as heck never thought of somebody creating a server or putting a server in their house. And so there wasn't a lot of case law on the books. And so I think what Comey said is look, we just can't prosecute this. It doesn't mean, he basically said, look, she's guilty on a bunch of fronts, but we can't prosecute, is what he said. And so I think what he should have done is he should have, I think it would have been safer for him to go out and say maybe what he said, but said, I'm very uncomfortable, we're going to put a grand jury together. I think that would have been, and let them deliberate. But then I think the challenge, he put himself in his shoes, he likely knew that she would get off because the law, not because she didn't do anything wrong, but because there's no law in place to prosecute. That was his problem. And so if he convened, I'm just trying to play this out for you. If he convened the grand jury, that goes more into the election season, and then she ends up getting off, right? But she would probably have to step down from running for president, and then forever the FBI is tarnished. That they basically interrupted and caused somebody to drop out of a presidential race for political reasons. I think that was the challenge. If you look at last week, this quid pro quo issue, which is some of that's getting, so I know that issue pretty well. That was not an issue of the FBI. The FBI did the right thing in that case. What it was, the person who did the wrong thing was the undersecretary at state, this guy named Kennedy, who offered up originally to an FBI official that, hey, if I really need some help on this classification. Well, the FBI official said, hey, okay, I don't know anything about classification, but I've been trying to get these people overseas. Can we try to work something out? So I think that alone by itself was normal discussion, because the person at the FBI didn't know he wasn't a classification person. He then calls the person at the FBI who's in charge of classification, and the classification guy says, what? What are you talking about? Like, you can't do that. And then the FBI guy goes back to Kennedy and says, hey, we can't do that. Then Kennedy presses on, calls that guy and says, hey, you need to change this, and had multiple times basically said he needed to change it. And then even goes above that guy to his boss, and the boss says, hell no, we're not going to change it. So in that case, the FBI actually did the right thing, but it was that first interaction where it appears like the FBI was offering a quid pro quo, but they weren't. It was the State Department that offered it, and then pushed it. And I think the more important question to ask is, why would a career bureaucrat at one of the highest levels in the Department of State even be engaged in that discussion? It's none of his business, especially when, after the Congress has already subpoenaed these emails, it's none of his business to try to change a classification of an FBI file or FBI information. It's not what he does. So just that alone is impossible, I think, for somebody at that level to answer that question. And so now we're going to have to pull all this apart. We're going to have a whole investigation, I don't know if you know, but myself and others have already called on this guy to be pushed aside. I mean, we can't have somebody that's willing to trade classified information for spots overseas be at a high level of office like that. Why he did it? I mean, look, I think we all know our common sense why he did it. He did it to protect Hillary Clinton, but that also has to be proven before in front of Congress and before the American people before we can do anything. But we sent a letter to Secretary Kerry and Obama saying this guy should be removed immediately. So that's a little bit more into I think that's what you were probably referring to, was the quid pro quo. All right, other over here.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Nunes. I'd like to thank you for your support and co-sponsorship of the HOPE Act to support the work that's being done for Alzheimer's disease. As you know, it's the 5th leading cause of death here in California, and there's over 5 million people that are affected by this disease. Do you anticipate increased support for research and funding so that we can get closer to a cure? It's a disease that potentially can bankrupt our Medicare system.
Well, it's passed both the House and the Senate. The question is the funding, and that's always the challenge with all of these things. So I think it actually that bill is larger than just Alzheimer's, as I remember. And I think it does a lot of reforms to make the system work more efficiently. But of course, it costs money, and that's the challenge. Now we're going to run over a half $500 billion budget deficit this year. So how do you actually do the right things to reform a program, put some more money into it, but at the same time continue to borrow money? And that's why I get to these bigger solutions have got to be found that we face. So to the problems we face. So whether that's tax reform, fundamental tax reform, fixing Obamacare, and other things, where a lot of the money that we spend as a government is being eaten up. So it's all a matter, but my guess is ultimately we come to some deal on that, but we'll see. So we got time for a couple other questions.
I got one real hard one for you.
Oh, supervisor. Politicians aren't supposed to be allowed to ask other politicians questions.
This is a pretty tough question. I don't even know if anybody even has the answer, but where is Hillary Clinton on Valley Water? Does she even have a position? And who do you see her aligning with, Feinstein or Boxer?
Well, Boxer will be gone, so I don't.
Well,
I'm joking.
that position.
Look, I just don't see. At the end of the day, I know that Trump will help. All right, Clinton will follow follow, just like many of the other politicians in Washington, what the 2 senators and the governor say. I mean, those are really, I mean, that's really our problem here, is we have one senator who basically said, not gonna help, Boxer, wasn't interested in helping, is fine with the land going back to its natural state. You have Senator Feinstein, who has said she'll help, but actually hasn't, says the right things, but hasn't acted on it. And then you have Jerry Brown, who basically is off in left field saying he's gonna build some tunnels, right? Which is, it's nice, because you can stand up there and say, well, we're gonna build some tunnels, and yeah, but that doesn't solve anything. So, you know, it always gets back to, you know, that's why I think it gets back to 2.5 million acre feet is what we're short. Show us the legislative language that you're going to support in Congress or as a governor or what have you that's going to get us the 2.5 million acre feet. And the bottom line is you only get the 2.5 million, you know, I've looked at this for a long time, you know the issue just as well as I do. There's only a couple ways you're going to get 2.5 million acre feet. That's running pumps in the Delta through the system that we have and building something like Temperance Flat, fixing the San Joaquin River settlement so that it's a year-round type of fishery. And just basically using the system that we have and then adding a little more infrastructure. I mean, that's how you're gonna get 2.5 million acre feet.
I just wanted to emphasize she doesn't have a policy.
Yeah, that's, well, yeah, but I don't think that, you know, at the end of the day, I'm not gonna put, I mean, I don't think she'll come out and hold a press conference and blame global warming. I assume they're not gonna make that mistake again. But anyway. Thank you. Any other questions for me, Supervisor?
What do you like Trump's position? He did spend some time.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I thought, you know, Trump was really interesting. I mean, he actually, for all his craziness, you know, he's actually very, very nice in person, and he was really interested in the water projects. You know, why? Because he's a construction guy, right? There's one thing that he knows construction. And you could tell, like, he was asking me questions, okay, like, well, how many pumps are there? What size are they? How many horsepower? I mean, it was really interesting. He's like, well, don't we need to build something? And I'm like, well, actually, for that, you don't need to build something. He's like, what? It's there, they're not on? I said, yes, that's ridiculous. It's like he didn't believe it. And this was after, like, the 3rd time of talking about it. And then when we were flying over, I was able to point out some of the canal systems. But he's a really funny guy. I'll close with this funny Trump story, which I thought was, I was kind of impressed with it, because I've been around a lot of these, you know, very popular politicians, whether they be president or candidate for president, or, you know, so if you go back to George W. Bush, you know, who I knew, and Romney, who ran for president, and you know, you guys know all the characters. So I went over to Silicon Valley to attend an event for Trump, and the next day Trump was going to come here to the Valley where we had set up an event here. But they wanted me to go over there and maybe talk to him after the event on intelligence issues. And so I went over there, and then I go in to meet him, and he's like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. You know, he acted like I was, you know, which, you know, a lot of politicians do, like I was his long lost friend. And then he says, but I really want to talk to you about, I need you to go back with me to LA. And I said, well, I got an event tomorrow for you. I can't just go back to LA, you know, with you. I got stuff I got to do. He said, no, I really need you to go. And I'm like, okay. So then I walk out, and then about 15 minutes later, he comes up to me and says, hey, I need you to go with me. We got to talk tonight. I said, oh, geez. So I went to Reince Priebus, who's the chairman of the RNC, and I said, Trump keeps asking me if I'm going to go with him to LA tonight. And Priebus is like, look, if you can go, like, the more people we can have around, the better, right? Because Trump's running like the flattest organization I've ever seen, right? He only has, his whole entourage is like Priebus, Giuliani, a press guy, one of his family members is always with him, and then his Twitter guy. That's it. Those are the only people with him. And so Priebus is like, you know, and I was impressed because he was like, so anyway, I ended up getting on going with him, and he's like working on his immigration speech, and he's like, well, what do you think about this? And of course, I'm trying to advocate for him to actually have a more sensible position. And so we talk about that, it's fascinating conversation because, I mean, he was actually, I mean, now granted, I've never been that close to a campaign before, like a candidate like that, but, you know, it shocked me that, you know, he's sitting there going line by line through his speech, you know, which is something like that I would do at my level, that I do a lot. I was kind of impressed by that, and then, you know, I kind of told him, I'm like, look, you know, I don't even have a suit, I got the same suit, and I gotta wear this thing tomorrow, you know, but he was happy I was there, so the next morning we do a few things, and then we're going to get on the plane, and he has this tie, and he shows me his tie, he says, hey, you like this tie? And I'm thinking, okay, it must be a Trump tie, you know, I don't know, you know, so he's like, you like it? You like it? I'm like, yeah, it looks great. He's like, you notice anything about it? And I said, well, no, not really. Same tie I wore yesterday. And he says, I wore it just for you. He's like, you got the same suit and tie on you had yesterday. I said, yeah.